Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 10th Lasker Lessons in Leadership. I want to remind everyone to please silence your cell phone if you have not done so already. And we are very excited to hear Mr. Rubenstein interview Dr. Fauci today. As it is the 10th anniversary of the Lasker Lessons in Leadership, I wanted to highlight that the Oxford-Cambridge scholars have really appreciated this series as a way to get to know other sides of science, whether that be policy when we had Mary Woolley or industry when we most recently met Dr. George Yancopoulos. These series are wonderful, and we cannot wait to hear what Dr. Fauci and Mr. Rubenstein have to say. And now I will introduce you to Dr. Claire Pomeroy, who is the president and CEO of the Albert and Mary Lasker Foundation, which is dedicated to accelerating support for medical research. Dr. Pomeroy has many accolades and serves on numerous boards, including the Morehouse School of Medicine and the New York Academy of Medicine, to name a few. She received her medical degree from the University of Michigan and completed her residency and fellowship at the University of Minnesota. She earned an MBA from the University of Kentucky. She received an honorary Doctor of Science degree from the University of Massachusetts Medical School in 2016. And she previously held positions as the Chief of Infectious Diseases and Associate Dean for the Research at University of Kentucky, and was the Vice Chancellor and Dean of the University of California Davis School of Medicine from 2005 to 2013. After that, in June of 2013, she became the president of the Lasker Foundation. So we'd like to thank the Lasker Foundation and the Alliance for supporting this event. And without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Claire Pomeroy.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome everyone to this Lasker Lessons in Leadership presentation. Just so you all know who's here tonight, could all the Oxcam students raise their hands? Yeah, okay. Could all the NIH Lasker Clinical Research Scholars raise their hands? Could all our board members raise their hands? Can all our NIH leadership raise their hands? Thank you, guys. And can everybody else who supports this program raise their hands? That means everybody, okay. All right. As you know, the goal of this program is to let you meet scientific leaders who inspire you and who give you some advice to help guide you in your science career. Now, we actually asked you who you wanted as a keynote speaker. Your choice was clear: Dr. Anthony Fauci. And tonight, we deliver. As you may know, Dr. Fauci was born in Brooklyn. The accent gives it away. He received his MD from Cornell. And I believe this is true. You joined the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in 1968 as a clinical associate researcher. And since 1984, he has served as that institute's director. Now, Dr. Fauci is one of my heroes. I'm an HIV doc. He has been a leader both in the lab and as a policymaker in the fight against HIV and AIDS. And I think he may talk a little bit tonight about his interactions with activists from ACT UP over the years. He was awarded the National Medal of Science in 2005, and I'm very proud to say the 2007 Lasker Award for Public Service. He got that in recognition of his role in two really, really important governmental programs, PEPFAR, which has saved millions of people, and biodefense. And he has continuously been a powerful voice for public health, leading the charge on programs from influenza to Ebola to, most recently that I know of, warning Congress about the reemergence of measles. And tonight, we have the special chance to hear Dr. Fauci be interviewed by none other than David Rubenstein, host of the David Rubenstein Show, peer-to-peer conversations, which shows on Bloomberg TV and PBS. Now, Mr. Rubenstein is a leader in finance and a renowned philanthropist. He started his career in law. He worked for the Carter administration, designing domestic policy. And then in 1987, he co-founded the Carlyle Group, where he served as co-executive chairman. The Carlyle Group is really one of the world's most successful private equity investment firms. And you have become known for what you have coined patriotic philanthropy, supporting a wide range of projects from repairing the Washington Monument to making sure we have pandas in our zoos. On his show, he talks with his peers, leaders of some of America's biggest companies, and explores keys to successful leadership. And he has said, "I don't mind asking prominent people questions that could be somewhat funny." We look forward to him doing precisely that tonight. Please come on up.
So, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. How many of you, by the way, ever considered going to law school? Anybody here? Nobody. Anybody consider going to business school? Anybody thinking of changing their mind? No? Okay. Well, we're fortunate that Dr. Fauci did not go to law school or business school. It has a distinguished career, and I'm going to take you through your life, and then we'll get into some of the diseases and other things that you've been working on. You grew up, as we'll tell in a moment from your accent, Brooklyn. Right. When you were growing up in Brooklyn, did you say, "I want to head up the Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases someday"? Is that what your childhood ambition?
No, actually.
No, what was your childhood ambition?
My childhood ambition was to be a professional baseball or basketball player.
Okay.
And that was an interesting lesson in life because I was really good at both sports, and when I went to high school, I was really quite good and thought this was what I was going to do. And I inherited a tremendous amount of speed from my father, and I also inherited my 5'7" frame from my father, which made it very difficult for me to be a professional basketball player.
I had the same ambition to be a professional baseball player, but two things. One, my athletic career peaked at 7, and secondly, I didn't realize if you're Jewish, you're not going to be an Major League Baseball player. You might be a Major League Baseball owner, but not a player. Okay, so, but you were better than me. You were the captain of your high school basketball team. Now, were you the shortest captain in the history of your high school?
No, not quite. There was maybe
there
one
was
or
somebody
two.
shorter than you was also captain?
Yeah, no.
Oh. All right, so did you get any bids to play like at Duke or not the UCLA?
No, I think it was a good lesson because I peaked at a level that was a high school level. And it was clear to me, I had enough insight, I told you the story before, is that I started to play as a senior in high school against freshmen who were in the colleges in New York City, which had really good basketball, like St. John's from the Big East. So at the peak of my high-scoring, great senior year, they pitted me against the freshman team in a scrimmage game. And I played against someone who ultimately went on to be an All-American and went to the pros to play for the St. Louis Hawks. And in that 40 minutes of basketball, I realized that I probably should go to medical school.
Well, let's see. So you applied to college. Now, did your father, who went to Columbia, your father was a pharmacist, is that right?
Right.
So your father went to Columbia, and you decided you wanted to go to the College of Holy Cross, or somebody told you you had to go there?
Well,
not that it's a bad place to go.
No, but it's a very interesting thing that I tell people this, and they think I'm being hyperbolic, but it's not. I went to a Jesuit private high school in New York City, Regis High School, which was a very elite. It was kind of like the Catholic version of Bronx High School of Science. And they decided, the Jesuit priest, where you would go to college. And they would literally, it's amazing now, it's almost a civil rights problem. They would not send your transcript to anything other than a Catholic college. So I wanted to be in pre-med, and at the time, and probably still now, at least among Catholic colleges, Holy Cross had overwhelmingly the best pre-med program. So they took all the top students in the class who wanted to be going to medicine. They said, you're going to Holy Cross.
So they didn't send your transcript to Brandeis?
No, they wouldn't send it, no.
Okay. Okay. So you get and at Holy Cross, you did not play basketball, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
So you did presumably pretty well there,
Right,
and then
I did.
you decided you want to go to medical school.
Right.
And how did you happen to decide to go to Cornell?
Well, Cornell, it was really a question between Harvard and Cornell. I wanted to go back to New York City, and there was something about Cornell when I went there and spoke to people, as well as to the dean of admissions, that it was clear that they were very well-rounded and not cutthroat. They really cared about other things that you were interested in, and that really attracted me. So when I turned on Harvard and went to Cornell, I pissed off a lot of people at Harvard, but I had a great time at Cornell.
In other words, New York City was less cutthroat than Boston. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, at the time.
Okay, at the time. Okay. So you get there, and are you a good medical student, or are you
Yeah.
kind of in the middle of the class?
I was good.
You were good. Okay. So when you graduate, did you say, all right, I'm going to set up a practice, I'm going to
No.
be a general physician, I'm going to do something like that, or what did you decide you wanted to do?
I at first really I fell in love with clinical medicine. So if I have any identity with regard of any scientific accomplishments I might have, my primary identity is that I'm a physician. So what I really wanted to do, I wanted to practice medicine in an academic setting, maybe doing some research and maybe doing some teaching. Since I had no research experience whatsoever, except for an elective in medical school, I took an internship and residency in internal medicine. And the thing that really changed the direction of where I was going was coming to the NIH, because back when I graduated from medical school and did my internship and residency, everybody was drafted. And it was the time the Vietnam War was going on. So everybody automatically got drafted, no matter what it was. And you had a choice. You had a piece of paper that said, where would you like to go? You could go to the Public Health Service and either be the NIH or the CDC. That was very competitive. You can go into one of the 4 services. So I checked off Public Health Service, NIH, second CDC, second Navy, Army, and Air Force. And I got into the NIH. And that's how I went down there with no research experience. And I got in a lab with a terrific mentor who essentially taught me from scratch research. And I did that for 3 years and found out that not only did I still like clinical medicine, but I also love science.
But you never thought of becoming a plastic surgeon to make more money or something like that?
No, I really liked infectious disease. Money was never, ever a consideration at all for anything. And I fell in love with infectious disease because, you know, there's a certain acute abruptness about it. Either you're going to die or you're going to get better. It's not anything that's in between. And I kind of like that. That's sort of my personality, for those of you who know me.
Right.
Right?
So I can vouch that he doesn't really care about money, because I've tried many times to try to recruit him into private equity, which I've called the highest calling of mankind, and he says he thinks what he's doing is more important than private equity. I don't know why he says that, but I guess most people probably agree with that. So let's talk about some infectious diseases, make sure I have it right. So when humans came out of caves, let's say 400,000 years ago or so, as Homo sapiens, the life expectancy was 20, more or less.
Right.
So did they die because of infectious diseases more than anything else? Was that what's killing people?
Back then, and even in some areas of the world now, infectious disease was overwhelmingly the leading cause of death. Overwhelmingly. I mean, and, you know, accidents of nature, war and things like that. But if you were a 20-year-old coming out of the cave, the chances of your getting a common infection that today we could easily treat could kill you like that.
So in Europe, in the Middle Ages, there was something called the bubonic plague.
Right.
What was that?
That was a bacteria.
That was-
Pasteurella pestis.
Okay, so
And it was very, very virulent. It spread rapidly and wiped out 1/3 of the European population in the 15th
how do we
century.
get rid of that today? We just have antibiotics, or what?
Well, yeah, there are several things. It was really the hygienic situation then. It was,
Okay.
you know, passed by rats and vermin and things like
Okay,
that.
in 1900, the life expectancy in the United States, hard to believe, of people born in 1900 was about, I think, 49.
Right.
So we had improved a bit, but now it's so much better. Is it because infectious disease treatment is much better? Is that why people are living longer, or nutrition better, or exercise?
All of the above, but infectious diseases is the one that made the greatest percentage leap. So if you looked at things, and we sort of have a model now because infectious diseases in certain regions of the world are still the leading cause of death of children. So if you look at what the leading causes of death are, it used to be infectious disease for the whole world, but it isn't right now. It's chronic diseases, non-communicable diseases. But back then, when you didn't have antibiotics, life expectancy charts go way down to 40, 50, because such a large percentage of babies and children die of diseases that they don't die of now. Right. So when you eliminate that, you add an additional decades of life, so the average goes way up. So the profound increase back then when antibiotics came, and vaccinations in addition to antibiotics, was mostly for childhood mortality. Right. Now it's gone up for better living habits, people smoking less, control of hypertension is overwhelmingly one of the most important ones. Stroke and heart disease going down, and not smoking, diet, for example, obesity. But trouble is we're getting an obesity epidemic now that's probably going to level that off.
Okay. Not that obese, but okay. So in my lifetime, I've dealt with some of these infectious diseases. So when I was growing up, polio was a big problem. Now, has that largely been wiped out of the United States, but not out of the world?
Right. So polio has been eliminated in most countries, very close to eradication. And the eradication now is we're almost there. A couple of countries, we had every country had essentially eliminated it. Elimination means it's no longer in a country. Eradicated means that there's no pathogen around. So smallpox has been eradicated. Polio has been eliminated in most places. But an event occurred years ago when there was this conspiracy theory that people who were vaccinating people in Nigeria and other places were doing it to sterilize the women, et cetera, like that.
Let's talk about smallpox for a moment. If you go back and read about the history of the Revolutionary War, you read that people were often getting vaccinated, inoculated.
Right.
How did they do that in those days? And it was thought to be dangerous, but you were getting inoculated against smallpox. It took a couple days for the treatment or something?
Right. Well, the smallpox vaccine originated with cowpox, where they observed that women who used to take care of the cows, the cow maids, that they would get a less virulent form of a pox called cowpox. And strikingly, they were essentially protected from getting smallpox. So people were dying from smallpox, but the cow maids weren't dying. So it became clear that maybe if you inoculated someone with this pox, this cowpox, which is the basis of smallpox, but then what others did is that they would take the scab of someone who actually had smallpox and vaccinate someone. Most of the time...
How did they actually do it? You get the scab, somebody who had it.
You just flip up the scab, you get a little needle, you go like that, and you just press it into the skin.
You take it from somebody who's already got it.
Right.
And then, how do they transport it? How do they transport it? Just somebody sitting there and...
Yeah. You want me to show you?
Well, no. But I mean, like if somebody has smallpox, they have a scab.
Right.
You take
get a
the
needle,
scab off.
and you just put a bit of the material, which is the pox.
Who came up with the idea this would work? Who was the scientist that came up with that idea?
Well, it was Edward Jenner.
Okay, so when they did it, it was thought to be, took a couple of days, it was thought to be dangerous. Sometimes people died.
Yes.
So why was it so dangerous?
Most of the time, they were protected. Very rarely would it lead to overwhelming smallpox.
All right, so what caused polio? What is the disease or germ that caused polio? Was it something that originated in an animal or?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you asked that, David, because about 75% of all the emerging infectious diseases are xenotropic. Namely, they're fundamentally animal viruses that jump into a human. Some of them are not, and those are the ones that you can eradicate. Polio is one of them. Polio falls under the broader category of an enterovirus. And
where did it come from?
It was just, it's there.
It's there. But was polio around in the Middle Ages, or maybe it was, we didn't know?
Almost certainly it has been always around.
Okay, so that's nothing I have to worry about now, right, in the United States?
There's no polio in the United States. You were vaccinated, so you're okay.
Okay. Right. What about malaria? Am I in any danger of getting malaria?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so how do I
Not
avoid that?
here
Not here.
in Bethesda, but
But if I go to Africa,
right.
does I have a
If you
chance?
go to a malaria zone and you're not having prophylaxis, which is an easy thing to take when
Right.
you go, we don't have an effective malaria vaccine. The best vaccine that we have is one that is about 30% effective, and it's not durable for more than a couple of years. So we
Oh,
really,
I thought when you go there to Africa, they give you some kind
they
of
give you a
shot.
pill. They don't
Pill.
give you a shot. They give you a pill.
Pill.
Malarone.
All right, and what is that going to do for you?
That essentially protects you because if you get bitten by a mosquito, it's an anti-mosquito drug. So
Oh.
Malaria is one of those diseases that's incredibly harmful, particularly to babies. Most of the victims of malaria are babies who die when they are
So
infants.
would you be against eliminating all mosquitoes from the face of the earth?
You know, that's a good question. I've gotten asked that before.
right, I mean-
I would be for eliminating the Aedes aegypti mosquito, which is the one that causes a lot of diseases in our hemisphere, but also a number of other. But to get rid of all the mosquitoes, then that's an ecologic. First of all, you're never going to be able to eliminate all the mosquitoes. But if you were, it would really create an ecologic imbalance. You'd see
Could
a
we
lot of
eliminate the ones near my house in Nantucket? Or
Yeah,
something
you
like
could do
That's
that.
what I'm mostly
Yeah,
interested
yeah.
in. Okay, so what about tuberculosis? What causes that, and has that been largely eradicated?
Ooh, no, it's not. So tuberculosis is caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It is the leading cause of infectious disease death in the world. Now, I'm going to tell you a statistic. You're going to say, Tony, you're kidding me. 1/3 of the world's population is infected with tuberculosis, but doesn't have active disease. It's in the latent form. There are 10 million new cases of tuberculosis each year and 1.8 million deaths from
In
tuberculosis.
the United States, or?
No, it's a developing world
Okay.
disease.
How do you avoid catching it?
Well, it's mostly very close, prolonged contact with someone who has it. It's a respiratory-borne
Okay.
transmission. So if you hang around here, you're not going to get tuberculosis unless someone comes in from another country, inadvertently doesn't know they have
okay.
TB and starts coughing on you.
All right, what about Ebola? Do I have a chance of getting that?
Not here.
Okay.
Right.
Now, is Ebola a problem in the United States at all now?
No. Well, you remember back in the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, which gained a lot of publicity because, as you might expect would happen, a person from Liberia who got infected in Monrovia came to Dallas, Texas. And they went to Texas and was infected when he was in Monrovia, came to see his girlfriend and his child in Dallas, went to an emergency room because he started to develop a fever. And wonder of all wonders, the poor emergency room person made the mistake that you never want to make, is he forgot to ask for a travel history and sent the guy out with acetaminophen and a Z-Pack. The guy went back home, got so sick he was absolutely moribund, got back to the hospital in Texas, and was taken care of in the intensive care unit and infected 2 nurses who were not properly dressed to
Right.
take care of him. I happened to wind up taking care of one of those nurses at the NIH Clinical Center.
You had to wear a whole bunch of equipment?
I did.
And were you worried that you were going to get Ebola?
You know, when you're in the room with a spacesuit on, taking care of a desperately ill patient who's going into shock, you don't think about what's going to happen to you.
You might not, but I would have, but
no,
okay.
but let me tell you, when you think about it, because this person that I took care of there was a lot of body fluids floating around, blood and stool and urine and things like that. So you think about it when you walk out of the room and you have to take off your personal protective equipment, because that's when most people get infected. They don't take the equipment off right. That's the reason why you have training of how you take each
okay.
thing off.
So Ebola is not something I need to worry about
No,
right
I
now.
wouldn't sweat Ebola, David.
Okay, so what about SARS? Do I have to worry about that anymore?
You know, SARS is an interesting example of emerging infectious disease that went away not by any great scientific discovery like a vaccine or a drug, but went away by typical low-tech 19th century public health measures: identification, isolation, quarantine, and then it went away. It came and it went. That was one of the ones that jumped species from an animal to a human. It went from a bat to a civet cat to a human.
Anything ever go from a human to an animal? That doesn't happen.
It doesn't usually
We don't
happen
know.
that way. No.
Okay, so let's talk about HIV.
Right.
When did people first realize that people were getting HIV and then AIDS. That was in the early 80s, I suppose. But why did it take scientists so long to figure out what was causing HIV and then how to prevent HIV from becoming AIDS? Why did that take so long?
Well, I'll answer your first question. We first became aware of it in a report of the MMWR from the CDC on June 4th of 1981, followed by one in July 5th, 1981, of the first cases from Los Angeles and then from New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. I don't think at all that it was a long time before we found out what it was. The first cases were recognized, even though it was around probably 10 years before. In the summer of 1981, the virus was discovered in the spring of 1983 and proven to be the cause.
Discovered by whom?
By Francois Barré-Sinoussi and Luc
Was the
Montagnier.
Nobel Prize awarded to people who?
Yes. It was discovered by one group in France, but proven definitively to be the cause of AIDS by Bob Gallo here when he was at the NIH.
Did they both win the Nobel?
Francois Barré-Sinoussi and Luc Montagnier won the Nobel Prize. Bob Gallo did not.
Okay, and what about the cocktail that were designed to treat HIV? Right. Was a Nobel Prize won for that?
You don't win a Nobel Prize for that.
Oh, really?
You win a Nobel Prize for a very, very specific finding that's usually fundamentally a basic science thing. The cocktail, which is 3 drugs in combination, in my mind, is one of the most important transforming discoveries in the history of medicine over the last multiple
decades. And who deserves the credit for that?
Multiple people. I mean, my group was involved, but it wasn't just us. It was first of all, Sam Broda, who was at the NIH at the time, demonstrated that AZT in vitro could actually block this virus. That was the first drug, but one drug alone wasn't good enough. We did a clinical trial, and it was the first and only placebo-controlled trial for HIV because you could only do a placebo-controlled trial if you have no other therapy. So it was placebo versus AZT. 19 people died in the placebo trial, and 1 person died in the AZT arm. So it was approved by the NIH, by the FDA. Then over the years, we developed combinations so that today you have 3 drugs, usually in a single pill, and you can give it to a person who's infected. When I was taking care of HIV-infected individuals, I started in the summer of 1981, and virtually every one of my patients died, usually within 6 months to a year and a half. That was the life expectancy. Fast forward now, if you take care of the same patient, if someone comes in and I give them a single pill of 3 drugs, it drops the level of virus to below detectable level, and you could predict to them that if they were 20 years old, they'd live an additional 50 years.
So who was Dr. David, who was it?
Right.
Did he come up with a cocktail, or he did?
No, he didn't. He got his picture on the paper of Time magazine, but
he didn't really do it. Okay, all right. Well, sometimes people get credit for something maybe they didn't do.
No, I mean, about 50 people did that.
Okay.
But, yeah.
So Magic Johnson famously came down with HIV and said, I can't play basketball anymore. And then he took a cocktail and he's okay, right?
Correct. He's one of the people that I said the drug brings down the virus to below detectable level and you live a normal life.
So there was a president of South Africa a while ago. His name is
Thabo Mbeki.
Mbeki, who used to say that HIV did not lead to AIDS. And how could anybody have said that, and why did people let him keep saying that?
Well, I have a long story that goes with Mbeki, but I'll give you a 30 seconds bit. He had a minister of health called Manto Shalabalala-Misamang, and she was a physician. And she was, I think, mentally deranged, to be honest with you. And I could say that now because she's not around and she's not going to sue me, but she was really, she thought that treating HIV with beetroot and herbs is the best way. Mbeki.
It's not, right?
No, it's not. Mbeki, unfortunately, was really a catastrophe because what he did, and this is the true story because I spoke to him about it and tried to convince him and he wouldn't listen to me, is that he was trolling on his computer one night and ran into a website that was frequented by people who were called HIV denialists, led by a guy who was at Berkeley, Duisberg. And Duisberg was a very well-known scientist. He was in the National Academy of Sciences. And he decided that HIV didn't cause AIDS, that AIDS was caused by homosexual behavior, by drugs, by a variety of other things. And he just propagated that, and it was the amazing time of a few years of false equivalency. So I used to be I remember on Nightline, arguing with him at the end of it. He made no sense. But the people who used to look at that would say, well, here's one guy in the National Academy of Sciences, and here's another guy in the National Academy of Sciences. He says HIV doesn't cause AIDS. Right. He says it does. And that created a big problem. So in South Africa, Mbeki refused to have the government pay for antiretroviral drugs. And they did a model calculation that during the years when he did not allow the drug to be given to the people, that about 350,000 people died because they didn't have access to drugs. So he's like a war criminal as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so today, if you come down with HIV, you take medication and you probably won't get AIDS. But now I read that you maybe can keep people from getting HIV. Is that right? There's some medication?
Yeah. There's a thing called treatment as prevention, and there's a thing called pre-exposure prophylaxis. So if I'm HIV infected and I take a drug, single drug, three drugs in a tablet, I could bring down the level of virus to below detectable, which means it's impossible for me to transmit it to my sexual partner. So I could prevent me from giving it to somebody. On the other hand, if I'm at a high-risk person who's practicing high-risk sex, and I take one pill a day called Truvada, I decrease by about 97% the chance that I would spread the virus, that I would acquire the virus.
The best way not to get HIV is?
The best way to not get HIV is to know the HIV status of your sexual partner.
Or drug if you take.
Obviously, you don't want to exchange needles, but needle sharing is a relatively small cause.
What about flu?
Right.
You are an expert on that as well. So should I take a flu shot every year?
Absolutely. I told you that many times.
I know, but I keep telling you I'm afraid I should take it because every time my friends would take it, they get the flu. I don't get the flu.
No.
So I don't take it. But,
David, the reason why people think that they get the flu from the shot is that sometimes they wait too long and get the shot during the flu season. Oh. And people get the shot, and then 4 days later, they get the flu.
My theory is there's many different types of flu, so I'll be getting the flu shot for one type. It's probably not the right type, then I'll get some other flu, so why bother, right? You get the flu shot every year.
I do.
All right.
Influenza often gets confused with other upper respiratory tract infections that are not influenza.
So the best way to stay healthy, you're obviously in very good shape, so do you take an aspirin every day or not?
I do, yes.
Statin?
Yes.
You're not worried about muscle fatigue and brain fatigue?
Well, if I got it, I would do an enzyme and see if I were getting one of the toxicities, and I'd stop.
But exercise, is that a good idea?
I do that.
Now, you run 3 miles every day?
Every day.
And, you're worried about your knees or nothing like that?
They're okay for now.
Okay. And what about an annual physical? Do you think an annual physical is a good idea?
That's a great question. I do think it is a good idea.
Okay.
If you do a cost effectiveness on it, people have published good papers saying that the amount of disease that you could catch early and save is not worth the amount of money given to the hundreds of thousands of annual physicals. But if you can afford a physical, that clearly there may be things that get picked up on a physical exam that if you get it early enough, you'd be fine. What I don't think you should do is to get a total body CT scan.
Why not?
No, because there's a good reason for that.
Assuming money's not an object, why not get one?
Because if you get a total body CT scan, you're going to find things that are insignificant that your physician will feel obliged to pursue, that the probable adverse events associated with that is not worth it.
Well, the problem with annual physicals I found is that the scales that the doctors use usually have 15 pounds more weight than is really the case. My experience is they must buy these scales that have, they just say you're weighing 15 pounds more than you really do.
Well, do a correction factor.
So I keep telling them that they should get different scales. Okay, so today you have been offered the opportunity to be the head of NIH on several occasions. Why did you decide not to become the head of NIH and stay where you are, which is a good place to stay? But
there were a couple of reasons. The first is that I'm at the level of connection to science and connection to clinical medicine that if I assume responsibilities of things that I think are important, but that I'm not particularly interested in. It would get me too far removed from what
Okay.
the roots of what I am. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that I really want to see this HIV/AIDS thing through
Now,
to the end.
today, you run the institute.
Right.
You do research.
Right.
You have your own lab.
Right.
And you see patients.
Yes.
So do you get paid 4 different salaries or just one?
Just one.
One.
Right.
Okay. And do you think that scientists are paid enough in the federal government for what they do?
I think absolutely not. I mean,
That seems
Well-
ridiculous, right?
well, you know,
How do you attract great people to the NIH?
well, it's the passion for doing something that you feel is important that
So
really turns
now
you
your
on.
passion is such. You've said you're going to do this until you can't do it anymore. So there's no retirement age. You're ready to do this for another 10 years,
Right,
20 years.
Right. As soon
Okay.
as I stop slowing, as soon as I slow down, I'll stop.
Okay. And now you've met many presidents. You've met President Bush 41, 43, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama,
And Reagan.
Reagan.
Right.
So who was the smartest of those guys? What would you say?
Well, you know, I'm going to sound like one of them. It depends what you mean by smart. Probably Clinton and Obama were close in the
Right.
sense of really, really sharp people.
I should have put Trump in there.
Yeah.
You met Trump?
I have not.
Okay, so you wouldn't put him in. Otherwise, you would have judged him to be up there
Right,
too. Right.
yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So when people write about you, in the end, what they're going to ultimately say is that you headed this organization since 1984,
Right.
and many things. But PEPFAR will be one thing that you are really remembered for, because PEPFAR was your idea. You went to President Bush and convinced him to do it. Now, how did that come about? Did he say, "Give me something I can be remembered for"? Or?
No, actually, he deserves an awful lot of credit. He called me into his office in 2000. I got to know him very well because he was the staffer in his father's White House before he became the governor of Texas and before he became the president of the Texas Rangers. So I got to know him then. When he became president, it was easy because I had already known him. After 9/11, there was the anthrax attacks. And that's when they called upon me to develop a biodefense for the country. And that's how we got all the money that we're doing with emerging infections. So I got to know him pretty well. So right around the early spring of 2002, he called me into his office, and this is exactly what he said. He said, "I believe now," because that was when it was clear that people were leading essentially normal lives, and everybody that was in Africa was dying. It was a disaster in Africa. He said, "I want you to do me a favor. I want you to go to Africa and determine the feasibility of whether or not we, as a rich nation," and this was his exact words, "that we have a moral responsibility as a wealthy nation to not have people die of a disease like AIDS merely because of where they live, namely in the developing world. So go to Africa and figure out if we can do something transforming. But here's what I want you to do. It's got to be transforming, and it's got to be bilateral. I don't want to be giving any money to phony leaders of countries. It's going to be something that we could directly be responsible for." So I went to Africa, spent some time there, went around and decided that, in fact, we probably could do it. And I was convinced by people who had some drug from philanthropists and were distributing it around, because people thought that maybe people in Africa wouldn't take 25 pills a day, wouldn't know anything about a schedule. And I became convinced. So I came back in the spring of 2002, and I said, "Mr. President, I think that we can do this." He said, "Okay, put a plan together." So I spent the next 7 or 8 months from like June of 2002 till December working with the White House staff, figuring out what are the countries we're going to be involved. Should we involve China and India? No, they have enough money. Russia? No. How about Africa, the Caribbean? We went on and did different models. I kept on going back and forth with the staff. Thank God he had a great staff. Some of them you may have known. People like Josh Bolton, Gary Etzen, and those people. And then finally we put it together, and I came to him and I said, "This is a plan." I said, "We have the Cadillac version, we got the Chevrolet version, we got a Mercedes version." And he said, "What's the Mercedes version?" And I said, "That's going to be $15 billion a year, for $15 billion for 5 years to start off with." That's a lot of money. And he said, let me worry about the money. Let's put it together. And I didn't know whether he was going to accept it or not. And then about 48 hours before the State of the Union address, I got a call from Mike Gerson and said, you better come down to the White House because we want you to put the phrase in the State of the Union address about announcing it.
Well,
so that's how it came about.
So, you have worked for many, many years here, as I mentioned. Federal employees aren't paid that much, but because your children, did they say, well, my father wasn't paid a lot, so I'm going to go into private equity? Your children decided to go into the commercial world, or your wife in the commercial world to support? How did you support 3 girls going to college and on a government salary? And are they now decided to go into private equity or hedge funds or something useful like that?
Well, the answer is no. I did it by a substantial proportion of my my salary was for tuition for a period of several years. So my daughters went to Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia. So you add up the amount of...
They couldn't get into Yale or Princeton or something?
But they decided that they didn't want to go into private equity. They're all now out in different parts of the country. My oldest daughter is finishing up her fellowship. She's got a PhD in clinical psychology in Boston. My youngest went to Stanford as a computer engineer and works in San Francisco. And my middle daughter, who went to Columbia, is a teacher in a charter school in New Orleans. So none of them are making a lot of bucks.
Wow. Okay, so any regrets in your career? No regrets about private equity, nothing like that?
I would have really liked to have worked for you, David. David came to my office, and it was the truth. He just said that, and I said, God, what a great guy. I really would like to work for him, but I really like what I'm doing.
Yeah, so,
you were very nice about it.
Well, you would have been great in private equity. We could have invested in a lot of healthy, good companies, but okay, you did pretty well for the world, I'd say. Okay, questions from anybody? We have time for some questions. Anybody? One right here, or well, here, right here.
Hey, first of all, thank you, both of you. This was exciting. This is for both of you. In many fields, the business aims and the things that are rewarding business-wise and the science aims aren't always aligned. I've read what you've said about, climate science and how it aligns with the equity business. And I wonder if I can get both of your perspectives, how the kind of science pursuits and the things that we're currently pursuing in research and medicine and how they line up with some of where the business investments in health are coming in and how we can approach it. Thank you.
Well, in the last, I would say, 10 years, maybe 20 years, the business community has recognized that there is a lot of money to be made by investing in new technologies in all kinds of things, obviously internet related and telecommunications related, but clearly today the life sciences is an area that people are pouring tons of money into. It has a very long payback period of time, but I think there's a general view that when you're investing in some of these life sciences kinds of things, you have a chance to make money, which has a value to it, but you're also doing something useful, and I think a lot of people enjoy doing that. And whether it's a good thing or not, that a lot of highly trained scientists, people that have MD, PhDs, or like my son-in-law has an MD and an MBA from Harvard, but he's not practicing medicine. He's in the biotech world. So I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because you're taking a lot of really smart scientists and putting them in the investment world, but maybe they'll put investments together that will actually help people. But I do think it's a very attractive area now, and science is something that the business community is very much more focused on than it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, as a place to put money and actually maybe do something useful.
From a science's perspective, years ago when I first started in my training, it was kind of like a cop-out for anybody in science to go work first of all, I would say biotech. There wasn't even biotech then. It was going into the pharmaceutical industry. Right now, the juxtaposition of really, really good scientists who go into biotech and go into the areas that David's company would invest in, I think is the reason why we're so successful right now. I don't think we would ever be able to do it if you dissociated and had a dichotomy between really good scientists and biotech and really good scientists and industry. So right now it's totally different. So right now there's almost like seamless between industry and classic academic medicine.
Okay, by the way, you ever worried about you might ultimately die from an infectious disease? Would that be, I wouldn't say ironic, but I mean, you know, you've done all these things to prevent people from getting infectious diseases. You ever worried about you might get the flu or something and it could go to pneumonia or something?
I don't worry about it, but the chances are if I live long enough, I'm probably going to wind up being, that's going to be the thing that knocks me out.
Okay, other questions? Let's see, who has it? Okay, somebody
So
call it
thank
right
you.
there. Go ahead.
Yep, I guess my question, I got thrown off by your question to Dr. Fauci because I wasn't expecting you to say that. So my question is, I guess we have a collection of exceptional scientists right down the road. We have a wealth of budget from internal and external revenue. How do you see, I'll take artificial intelligence as an example. How do you see being able to leverage all of our talent over time with, I guess, the question that was just asked with all of this Google money or Amazon money coming in with these data scientists using AI? How can we leverage this moment in time with all the data we have, with all the scientists we have? It's almost like we need everybody at the table saying, well, here's our skills, here's our talents. What efforts are we doing to get that moving forward? And I think that it's a very big question in terms of partnerships that the NIH can foster, but how can we work towards something like that?
You know, we are working towards it in some respects because artificial intelligence and data science is actually the new hot thing at the NIH. So you're going to be seeing a lot more back and forth from what is the classical academic NIH into what you've just mentioned. And it's going to be making use of whatever capabilities, be they Google or whatever it is. You're going to see a lot more of that, I'll guarantee you.
Yeah, because I think our patients are living longer with chronic diseases. So if you take the HIV patients and you look at what's actually going to start, consuming them, what's consuming them, it's going to be chronic diseases that maybe we can mine data to understand better.
Right. So. Totally agree.
Who's calling on people? So, okay.
Thanks. A question for Dr. Fauci. So you talked a little bit about the HIV to AIDS, denialists that you had to deal with, a couple decades ago. Is there anything you learned that can help us now with the current age of anti-vax and these measles outbreaks that we as scientists can use in our arsenal for communicating effectively that you found particularly effective? Because you see all these studies like, facts don't win arguments or all the ways that we're not able to do this effectively. So is there anything you found that worked that we can try?
Well, the AIDS denialists were, I think, a little bit different, but had some overlap with what I think you're referring to right now, which I have to deal with right now, is the lack of vaccine. And people use the word anti-vaxxers. And the one thing I've learned dealing with them, that certainly people not vaccinating their children is without a doubt the cause of the outbreaks that we're seeing in Brooklyn with the Hasidic Jews, in Minnesota with the Somalians, in Washington State. And when you're trying to deal with people who are not vaccinating their children, you can't treat them as a unidimensional group because it's not. What you have is those who are really philosophically anti-vaccine. Don't you do anything to my child. I'm a libertarian. I'll decide what goes with my child. There are a number of other people who are just misinformed. And the big area of misinformation is that measles and measles, mumps, rubella causes autism, which, as we all know, I think everybody in the room knows, was based on a fraudulent study by a person whose medical licensure was taken away from them. Yet it gets on the internet and people see it and they still believe it. So those people, you try to get good scientific basis, good data, and try and appeal to their rational way. There's another group who don't vaccinate their children because they don't have access to health care, or they kind of think, well, maybe if I put it off because, I got plenty of time before they go to school. You can win all those over. With regard to the people who are purely anti-vax, and that's the big argument that's going on right now, what should state, local, or even the federal government do to compel them? So there are three reasons why a person can get a waiver for vaccinating their children before they go to school. Because the school gateway is where you get them. One is a religious waiver. That's valid. There aren't a lot of religions, but there are some that say don't get vaccinated. The other is a medical reason. That's the most valid. You don't want to vaccinate a child with an immunodeficiency disease with a live attenuated vaccine. But the third is the one that's the killer, and that's the philosophical. Because philosophical is anything. You could just say I'm philosophically against something. So what states are doing now, they're very, very much decreasing the flexibility of the philosophical objection. So bottom line, short version, is that don't come down hard on everybody because they're not all the same. But the ones that you absolutely are not going to convince, you need to put some pressure on.
Can they get vaccinations where it doesn't hurt? Like so, when you get vaccinated, it hurts a little bit. Why can't they have some that don't hurt?
We're working on needleless vaccines.
Oh.
You could put a patch on, and it's sort of just essentially osmosis through. But most of them don't hurt that much, Dave.
Okay. All right. Well, I still remember mine. Okay.
My question is for Dr. Fauci. So there's a lot of prospective scientists in the room, people in the Oxfam program. So what kind of advice would you give us as we go into science down the road so that we can hopefully be sitting one day being interviewed by Dave Rubenstein?
Well, I can tell you what has driven me and what I've observed in a good way drives my colleagues is do what you feel passionately about. I mean, don't be doing something unless you're really excited about it. And if you think that you want to do something but it just doesn't turn you on, then think about something else, because the only way that you're going to get through science in a way that you're happy and productive is if you're really passionate about it. Just kidding around a little bit, David is a lawyer, and he realized at one time that he wasn't as passionate about it and didn't really think that he was fulfilling all of his talent, but got really passionate about what he's done better than almost anybody in the world is in the area he's in right now. I find a lot of people come into my office sometime asking for advice, and they're struggling because people are expecting them to do this pathway. Just go to the pathway that you really feel good about. I call it the gut check. So you take an intellectual evaluation of something, and then you say, okay, I'm going to decide to do that, and then figure out what your gut tells you. Your gut's really good. It often tells you, you got all the right reasons for that, but I still don't want to do it. Or there's so many reasons why I shouldn't do this, but I really love it. That's what I would recommend.
Let me ask you, I may have a magnetic force that attracts these things to me, but whenever I go to a dinner party, I seem to sit next to somebody who's coughing all the time. Or I'm sitting in a movie theater and the person behind me is coughing like bubonic plague kind of cough, a big, heavy cough. Should I just get up and walk away? Or when somebody's sitting next to me and they're coughing, should I say, look, I'm sorry, but I'm susceptible to your thing, and just move away? Do you ever have this problem?
I do.
What do you put a mask on? You put a gauze thing on, or?
No, I don't, but sometimes you really can't avoid it. I came back from a meeting in Europe about 6 months ago with a woman who just coughed on me for the entire thing, and I said, well, it's a good control experiment. The chances of my getting sick are overwhelmingly great. Sure enough, 4 days later, I got sick. But you, as I know, as a friend of yours,
right,
you are a constitutional hypochondriac.
I am. I'm always afraid of getting something.
Therefore, if I were you, for your own mental health, I would get up. I would get up.
I feel like sometimes I also feel I'm walking down the street, and as soon as the person gets right next to me, that's when they cough. They could have coughed before. They could have coughed afterwards. They coughed right when I just noticed it. Maybe I'm a hypochondriac. Okay, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions because we want to eat dinner. All right.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Fauci as well. We talked about HIV earlier and the discovery and the early work on antiretroviral drugs. Where do you see the future of HIV research going, especially with the recent publication of the London patient that kind of replicates the Berlin patient, and also the reports on the CCR5 mutant babies from China? Is there like some sort of gene therapy complementing drugs, or what's the future of HIV research?
I'll give you the longer version if you read the Washington Post, I wrote an editorial that I think is it's online now. I think it's gonna come out tomorrow, I think, but it's online. And I answered that question. So, and I answered in the context of the so-called cure of the London patient that was reported in Croy. There are two things that I see for HIV. We have the tools right now to end the epidemic. So this becomes an implementation challenge, even more so than a scientific challenge. So we still want to get a vaccine. And if we get a vaccine that's 50% effective, it'll just be the nail in the coffin. But unlike any other time with HIV, and this is what David and I were just talking about, if you take somebody and put them on an antiretroviral drug and drop the virus to below detectable level, not only will you save their life, but you will make it impossible for them to transmit the infection. We were reluctant to say that because we didn't want people to start being reckless with their sexual life, but it is virtually impossible to transmit it to somebody else. Take that. Then there's pre-exposure prophylaxis, that if a person is at risk, takes a single pill of Truvada a day, decreased by 97% the chance that you're going to acquire infection. So if you just take a deep breath and think about it, theoretically, if you took everybody who was HIV infected and put them on an antiretroviral drug and took all the high-risk people and gave them PrEP, you could stop the epidemic tomorrow if you theoretically, but we don't live in a theoretical world. So it becomes an implementation thing. So for me, what I see is a really full-court press, and that's what we announced with the plan to, quote, end the epidemic in the United States, the article I wrote last week in the Journal of the American Medical Association, because there are parts of this country, the world the same, but in this country, it's stunning. There are 3,007 counties in the United States. If you look at the United States map, all those little boxes, they're counties. 3,007 counties. In 48 of those counties, plus the District of Columbia, plus San Juan, Puerto Rico, 50 out of 3,007, more than 50% of all the infections in the United States occur in those 48 counties. So you have a geographic hotspot that you could focus on, and you have a demographic hotspot. Because even though 13% of the people in the United States are African American, almost 50% of the new infections are in African Americans, 65% among men who have sex with men, and 75% in young men who have sex with men. So you got these big, huge targets. So to me, that's where I see it going. At the same time that you do all the things of cure research and vaccine research, we have in our power to end the epidemic as we know it right now.
Is it safe, by the way, to shake people's hands all the time? Like, is that going to be getting a communicable disease or infection?
There are some respiratory-borne illnesses that the virus can live on the hand. People, cough and sneeze, and then they shake your hand, which is the reason why you got to wash your hands.
Do you shake hands with people all the time?
I do, but I wash my hands a lot too. I'm like Medea, right? Yeah.
All right, if somebody comes up and a woman wants to kiss you on the cheek, you kind of say, well, I'm the head of the infectious disease part of the NIH, and I don't really think it's a good thing. Did you ever do that?
No.
You haven't done that. Okay, all right. All right, I think our time is up, so thank you very much, Dr. Fauci.
Before you get to have dinner, I just want to ask Dr. Fauci one last question, if I could. Tony, David said that he doesn't want to get the flu shot because, he might get a different flu. When are we going to get a universal flu vaccine?
That's a good question. We've developed a strategic plan at the NIH. We have a lot of good people working on it right now. We have a couple of candidates in phase 2 and one in phase 3 trial. So as you well know, I can't give you a prediction of when we're going to get a vaccine, but I think it's within our sights in the next several years.
Okay. Well,
so we would like to give you 2 tiny thank you gifts and get a picture with you if we could. First of all, David,
thank you very much.
The Mary Lasker stamp.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Your own version of it.
Okay.
And for you, Dr. Fauci, a thank you plaque to add to your collection. Thank you very much.